After I decided my sister's death, there was no turn back. I didn't realize the moment I lost control was when I clicked accept. The worst part isn't what I saw later. It's that I hesitated before closing the page, and then didn't. At 2:13 a.m., I was staring at a countdown timer on a black screen while thousands of anonymous users watched with me, waiting to decide how someone would die. That didn't happen right away. It started the way most bad decisions do: quiet, boring, and justified. I wasn't looking for anything extreme, just curiosity. Late-night browsing had a way of drifting into places you didn't intend to go, especially when sleep stopped coming easily. One link led to another, each slightly more obscure, slightly less indexed, until I found myself reading about hidden forums that didn't show up on normal search engines. I told myself I just wanted to see if they were real. The first site I accessed wasn't shocking. It was almost disappointing. A simple message board, poorly designed, full of encrypted usernames and threads that read like inside jokes. People discuss things in coded language: transactions, services, requests. Nothing I could fully understand, but enough to make me uneasy. I should have stopped there. Instead, I created an account. The registration was strange. No email, no verification, just a generated ID and a warning. Participation implies consent. At the time, it sounded like empty theatrics. For the first few days, I only watched. Threads would appear and disappear within hours. Some users seemed to hold authority. Others behaved like spectators. Occasionally, links were posted, temporary, expiring quickly. I clicked a few. Most led nowhere, but then one didn't. It opened to a private page. Black background, a single video window, and a chat feed scrolling rapidly on the side. The video wasn't live, at least I don't think it was, but it showed something I couldn't fully process at first. A person in a room, bound to a chair. Someone else standing just out of frame, asking questions in a calm, measured voice. The chat reacted in real time. Suggestions, reactions, commands. I closed the page immediately. My hands felt cold, like I'd touched something contaminated. I told myself it was staged. It had to be. People online faked things all the time. Shock content, elaborate hoaxes. That explanation held for about an hour. Then I went back. The link was gone, but my account had a new notification. You left early, no sender name, and no reply option. Just that sentence. I didn't respond. I didn't even know how to. But over the next few days, more messages appeared, always short, always precise. You observe, but you don't engage. Passive users are still users. Next session soon. I tried to ignore them. I really did. I went back to normal sites, normal routines, normal distractions. But everything felt thinner, less engaging, like I'd seen something behind the surface of things and couldn't unsee it. Eventually, another link appeared. This time, I didn't hesitate as long. The layout was different, cleaner, more structured. A timer at the top, a list of usernames on the side, each with numbers next to them, points maybe, or rankings. The video hadn't started yet. The chat was already active. People weren't just watching, they were discussing outcomes, voting, suggesting options like it was some kind of game. I noticed something else too. a panel on the right side I hadn't seen before. Participation required. Under it, a simple interface. Buttons, choices, lock for now. I should have logged out, deleted whatever account I had, shut my laptop and walked away. Instead, I waited. When the timer hit 0, the video began. This time, it was unmistakably live. Person in the frame reacted to things happening in real time. Delayed responses, interruptions, moments that didn't follow any script I could imagine. The one asking questions adjusted constantly, responding to something unseen. The chat. They were influencing it, not directly, not obviously, but patterns emerged, suggestions repeated, certain users highlighted, and gradually, the person on screen was pushed further into distress, not through chaos, but through controlled escalation. It was organized. That realization unsettled me more than anything else. This wasn't random. It wasn't some fringe anomaly. It was a system, and I was inside it. Halfway through the stream, something changed on my screen. The participation required panel unlocked. A message appeared beneath it. Observer threshold reached. My cursor hovered over the options. They were phrased clinically, detached, as if removing emotion made the decision less real. I didn't click anything. Not at first, but the interface didn't go away. Instead, a countdown appeared next to it, and another message. Inactivity will be interpreted as consent. That's when I realized something I hadn't considered before. Watching wasn't neutral, and whatever this was, it wasn't gonna let me stay on the outside. I told myself I could still leave, even while the countdown next to the decision panel continued to shrink in steady, indifferent intervals. There was no visible pressure beyond that timer, no sound, no warning beyond the message already displayed. Yet the silence carried a weight that made it difficult to think clearly. The chat continued to scroll on the side of the screen, moving at a pace that suggested hundreds of people were present, all of them focused on the same unfolding moment, all of them treating it as something routine rather than extraordinary. The options presented to me were worded in neutral language, stripped of anything that might suggest consequence or morality. Each one described a direction rather than an action, as if I were simply adjusting variables in a controlled environment instead of influencing something real. I tried to rationalize it again, telling myself that it had to be staged, that there were safeguards, that no system like this could exist without being exposed almost immediately. That line of thinking held for less time than I expected. The person on the screen reacted to something that had not yet been typed into the chat, and the timing of it did not align with any delay or scripted sequence. There was a moment where they hesitated, looking toward the edge of the frame as if listening to instructions being given off camera, and then responded in a way that suggested fear rather than performance. It was subtle, but it was enough to disrupt the explanation I had been relying on. The timer reached the final seconds. I did not want to make a decision, but doing nothing was still a form of participation according to the message in front of me, and the system had made that clear in a way that removed any illusion of neutrality. My cursor remained over the panel, unmoving, while the numbers dropped to 0. When it ended, one of the options highlighted automatically. There was no confirmation prompt, no second chance to reconsider. The selection registered instantly, and the chat reacted almost immediately, not with surprise, but with acknowledgement, as if my input had been expected rather than incidental. I felt a shift then, not in the room, or on the screen, but internally. A quiet recognition that I had crossed from observing into contributing, even if the action itself had been minimal. The session continued for several more minutes, though I no longer followed it in the same way. My attention kept returning to the panel, now inactive again, and to the realization that my account had been integrated into whatever structure governed the site. I closed the page shortly after, not abruptly, but with a kind of controlled detachment, as if reacting too strongly would somehow make the situation more real than I was willing to accept. For the rest of the night, I avoided reopening the site, though the thought of it lingered in a way that made everything else feel secondary. I tried to distract myself with familiar routines, but concentration came in fragments, and every quiet moment seemed to pull my attention back to the same unresolved question of whether what I had seen was real. The following morning, there was a new message waiting. You participated. It appeared in the same format as before, without sender identification and without any visible method of reply. Beneath it, another line appeared after a short delay. Accuracy will improve with continued exposure. The wording unsettled me more than the message itself, particularly the implication that there was a measurable standard being applied to my actions. I considered abandoning the account entirely at that point, but the lack of a clear exit option made that decision feel less straightforward than it should have been. Logging out did not feel sufficient, and deleting the browser data seemed like a symbolic gesture rather than a practical solution. Over the next 2 days, I avoided accessing the site, though the notifications continued to accumulate. Each one followed the same pattern, short statements that acknowledged my absence without directly addressing it. There was no escalation in tone, no threats or urgency, which made them more effective in a way that was difficult to articulate. Eventually, curiosity reasserted itself, though it felt different than before. It was no longer casual or detached, but tied to a need for clarity, for confirmation of what I had already begun to suspect. When I logged back in, the interface had changed slightly. A new section had been added. Active observers. My username was listed there. Next to it was a number. At first, I assumed it represented the single interaction I had made, but as I watched, it increased by 1 without any input from me. I had not clicked anything, had not opened any new sessions, yet the system continued to register activity as if my presence alone was sufficient to qualify. That was when I noticed something else. A smaller panel at the bottom of the screen displayed a series of timestamps, each corresponding to moments when I had been logged in previously. Next to each timestamp was a brief notation summarizing my behavior in detached clinical terms. It did not describe what I had clicked, but how long I had observed, how often my cursor had moved, how quickly I had reacted when the decision panel appeared. It was tracking far more than I had realized. The implication of that extended beyond the site itself, suggesting a level of access that I had not consciously granted. I checked my system settings, my network connections, looking for something that might explain it, but nothing appeared out of place. There were no unusual programs running, no visible indicators of intrusion. Despite that, the data on the screen was accurate. The next session began without a countdown this time, transitioning directly into a live feed as soon as it became available. The chat was already active, and the structure of the interface suggested that the process was becoming more streamlined, more efficient, as if it no longer needed to guide new users through the initial stages. The decision panel appeared again. This time, it did not wait. A message accompanied it. Delayed input reduces outcome precision. The options were different now, more specific, requiring a level of engagement that went beyond passive selection. I hesitated again, but the hesitation felt weaker than before, less rooted in resistance and more in uncertainty about the consequences of choosing incorrectly. That distinction mattered more than I was comfortable admitting. As the session progressed, I began to notice patterns not only in the behavior on screen, but in the responses from the chat and the system itself. Certain users influenced the flow more than others. Their suggestions echoed and reinforced until they became the dominant direction. The system appeared to prioritize those inputs, adjusting in ways that aligned with the collective rather than the individual. I was not just participating. I was being integrated into a larger mechanism. The realization settled, slowly, but once it did, it changed how I interpreted everything that followed. The site was not simply presenting content. It was conditioning responses, measuring reactions, and refining participation over time. And the more I stayed, the more precise it became. By the end of that session, I no longer questioned whether I should leave. I questioned whether leaving was still an available option at all. When I logged in the next time, the interface had evolved in a way that made my earlier sessions feel almost primitive. The main video panel displayed multiple feeds simultaneously, each labeled with a code rather than a name. The side chat had multiplied, splitting into subthreads with color-coded usernames, numbers ticking beside them as if tracking influence or reputation. At the top, a simple message scrolled: "The observer decides." I stared at it longer than I should have. The phrase was abstract, almost ceremonial, but the implication was immediate. Observers were not passive anymore. Their attention, their choices, their hesitation or engagement all shaped what would happen in the feeds. The first feed revealed the nature of the forum more clearly than I could have anticipated. A person appeared in a small, windowless room, restrained in a manner that made escape impossible without intervention from outside. They were alive, breathing, blinking rapidly, adjusting to the situation as much as possible under the circumstances. The chat exploded almost instantly with votes, comments, and calculated suggestions. Users debated methods, offered conditional choices, argued over efficiency, over timing, over what would make the session more satisfying to the audience. I realized quickly that satisfying in this context did not mean entertainment in a casual sense. It was cruel, meticulously calculated. The votes determined what would happen next, and the system executed them. Not in graphic detail, at least not on screen. What was displayed was enough to know consequences were real. Users celebrated a moment of submission, critiqued hesitation, and measured the subject's responses. Every twitch, every flinch, every verbal protest was noted, commented on, and ranked. My stomach tightened. Watching it unfold was far worse than I had imagined. I was seeing real people reduced to data points, and the community around it treated the suffering as a mechanism rather than a tragedy. They didn't just watch. They participated, voting in polls, timing their inputs, suggesting variations, celebrating the breakdown of someone else's will. Then the second feed began. This one was subtler but more psychologically destructive. The subject was confined in a room with no visible restraints, but every choice they made triggered a visible response from the observers. The chat debated options like it was a strategy game. Delay, comply, resist, each with consequences calculated to elicit panic, fear, or compliance. The audience's influence felt invisible at first. Then it became obvious that the system translated their votes into real-world outcomes, bending the subject's environment to their collective will. It wasn't physical brutality displayed on screen. Instead, it was the anticipation, the manipulation, the constant uncertainty, and the fear of consequence. Every hesitation, every misstep, every attempt to assert agency was noted, and the subject paid the cost. The psychological weight alone was enough to make me wince. By the third feed, I understood the full scale. The system had a hierarchy. Users earned reputation points not simply by observing, but by influencing outcomes, by ensuring that the subjects followed the patterns the majority dictated. A panel on my screen tracked each observer's influence and compliance. I had none. My inactivity was recorded. I felt my pulse spike when a notification popped up. Observer engagement required. That's when the first implication of my own entrapment became clear. Participation was not voluntary. My hesitation, my delay had already been tracked, categorized, and flagged. The system prompted me again with a panel offering choices for the next subject. The wording was clinical, neutral, stripped of morality. Input required to continue session. Default action will apply if none is given. I realized that default action meant more than a technical fallback. The system controlled real people, and inactivity from me did not stop it. It forced outcomes that were worse, faster, or more severe. By failing to act, I had already contributed. My inaction was participation. My fear, my reluctance, was a metric the system could use. And then I saw the feed that broke something inside me. The subject was not a stranger. The person's face was familiar enough to unsettle me before my mind could rationalize it. Restrained, cornered, visibly anxious, reacting to the system in ways that indicated they knew what was coming next. The chat didn't treat them like a human. It was focused, precise, evaluating, predicting their behavior. Votes came rapidly, decisions executed automatically. Every minor choice by the subject was met with a response determined not by them, but by the observers, and the weight of their collective decision fell like a shadow. I froze. Not physically, mentally. I understood that my account, my participation, had been observed and tested from the moment I first logged in. The system had been learning me, measuring my responses, calculating how I would hesitate or act. Now it had escalated. My inaction or refusal to participate could trigger outcomes the system had already associated with me personally. I wasn't just a watcher anymore. I had become a node in the network of cruelty, a necessary participant. By the end of that session, my role was unmistakable. The chat congratulated certain users for precise influence, while others were subtly admonished for indecision. My name appeared in the list, not for approval, but for assessment. Participation was no longer a matter of choice. It was expected. My decisions, or lack of them, now determined outcomes, and the system had made it clear that my engagement was necessary to protect others. The realization struck with a clarity that left me cold. I had crossed a line the moment I first engaged, and the consequences extended beyond the digital interface. Inaction would not absolve me. I was trapped. The system had learned, adapted, and positioned me as both observer and enforcer, accountable to the network and the subjects themselves. I closed the laptop, staring at the black screen long after the glow had disappeared. But I knew I would return, because leaving now would not make me free. Leaving now would only transfer responsibility elsewhere. And the first warning had already made clear what that meant. From that moment, the dark web was no longer curiosity. It was a cage, and the keys had already been handed to me. I tried to stay away after that session, but avoidance quickly proved to be another illusion the system had anticipated. The notifications did not stop, and this time they carried a different tone, not urgent, not threatening, but expectant, as if my absence itself was being measured against an internal threshold I could not see. By the second day, a new message appeared that made the situation impossible to ignore. Observer inactivity creates imbalance. Correction required. It was followed by a timestamp, a schedule, the next session. There was no direct instruction telling me to return, but the implication was precise enough that ignoring it felt like a decision with consequences rather than a neutral act. I tried to rationalize it again, to convince myself that shutting everything down would sever whatever connection existed between me and the system. But that belief was already weakened by what I had seen. The site had demonstrated a level of awareness that extended beyond simple interaction, and the data it displayed about my behavior suggested that it was tracking far more than I had willingly provided. When the time came, I logged in. The interface responded immediately, as if it had been waiting. Observer re-engaged. This time, there was no transition period. The feed was already active, and the moment I entered, I was placed directly into the session. The layout had been refined again, focusing attention on a single subject instead of multiple feeds. The chat was slower, more deliberate, as if the participants understood that this session required precision rather than volume. The person on screen was restrained in a way that limited movement, but did not completely immobilize them. Their breathing was visible, uneven, controlled in short bursts as they tried to steady themselves. There were marks already present, faint but noticeable, suggesting that this was not the beginning of their time in that room. The system was not starting from zero. It was continuing from a point I had not witnessed. A panel appeared on my screen almost immediately. Primary observer assigned. My username was highlighted. The realization settled heavily. I was no longer part of a group making collective decisions. I had been isolated, elevated into a role that carried direct influence. The chat did not disappear, but it shifted, becoming advisory rather than authoritative. Suggestions appeared, but the final input rested with me. I did not move the cursor at first. The system compensated. A countdown appeared again, shorter than before. Delayed response reduces subject stability. The wording was calculated, designed to create a sense of urgency without explicitly stating the consequences. I understood it anyway. My hesitation would not stop what was happening. It would only make it worse. The options presented were more detailed now, more specific in their outcomes. Each one represented a different path, different escalation, all framed in detached technical language. I stared at them, trying to find a way to interpret them as something less than what they implied. But the feed on the screen made that impossible. The subject reacted as the timer approached zero, as if they could feel the decision coming. Their eyes moved, scanning the room, searching for something that wasn't there. When the timer ended, the system did not select for me this time. It waited, holding the moment in suspension. I clicked. The response was immediate. The subject's reaction was not exaggerated or theatrical. It was abrupt, involuntary, the kind of response that comes from something real and unavoidable. The movement was restrained, limited by whatever held them in place, but the tension in their body was unmistakable. The chat acknowledged it in clinical terms, analyzing the reaction, noting the effectiveness of the choice. I felt a shift again, deeper this time. Not just participation, responsibility. The session continued, each decision building on the last. The system adapted to my inputs, refining the options, narrowing the range of choices in a way that made escalation feel inevitable. The subject's condition changed gradually, not in sudden extremes, but in accumulated strain. Small details began to stand out. The way their hands trembled, the way their voice faltered when they tried to speak, the way their posture collapsed slightly more with each passing minute. There was a moment when I hesitated again, longer than before. The system responded differently this time. A new message appeared across the screen, interrupting the feed. Observer hesitation detected. Below it, another line. External variables may be affected. My chest tightened. The message did not explain what external variables meant, but it didn't need to. The implication was clear enough that my thoughts immediately shifted away from the screen and toward everything outside of it. My apartment, my phone, the people I knew, all suddenly felt connected to whatever system I had entered. The feed resumed. The subject looked worse now, not in a dramatic way, but in subtle cumulative damage. There was a thin line of blood visible along one side of their face, not flowing heavily, but enough to confirm that the consequences of each decision were physical, not simulated. Their breathing had become uneven again, sharper this time, punctuated by brief pauses that suggested they were trying to control something they couldn't. I made another choice, not because I wanted to, but because the alternative had been made clear. The session reached its end without any clear signal that it was over. There was no announcement, no conclusion, just a gradual slowing of the interaction until the feed faded and the interface returned to its neutral state. A final message appeared. Session complete. Then another. Observer performance recorded. I sat there for a long time after it ended, staring at the screen without really seeing it. My hands felt disconnected, like they had acted independently of me. I tried to justify what I had done, to frame it as something forced, something unavoidable, but the system had been designed to eliminate that distinction. I had made choices. Each one had led to a visible outcome, and the system had recorded all of it. Before I could log out, one more notification appeared. This one was different. It contained a file. No explanation, no label, just a prompt to open it. I hesitated again, but by then, hesitation had already proven meaningless. I opened it. It was a video, not from the session, not from any feed I had seen. The camera angle was different, lower, closer, as if recorded from within the room rather than from the corner. The subject was the same person from the session I had just completed. The timeline marker indicated that it was recorded after the feed had ended. They were still alive when it started. Barely. The room was quieter, stripped of the structure and pacing imposed by the system. There were no prompts, no visible observers, just the aftermath of what had already been decided. The subject tried to move, weakly, their body responding in delayed, uncoordinated motions. There was no one else in the frame, but the absence of intervention felt intentional. The video did not show the moment of death. It did not need to. It ended before that. A final message appeared beneath it. Observer accountability confirmed. I closed the laptop slowly, but the image stayed with me in a way that made closing my eyes feel like reopening it. The distance I had relied on, the idea that I was separated from what was happening by a screen, was gone. The system had removed that barrier. I was no longer watching something unfold. I was part of what came after. And whatever came next, I knew it would not allow me to step back again. The next message arrived before I even considered logging back in. It wasn't on the site. It was on my phone. No notification sound, no identifiable sender, just a screen that lit up on its own while it rested on the table beside me. Final session scheduled. Below it, a time, and beneath that, a single line that made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't ignore. Non-compliance will redirect subject selection. I did not need clarification. By that point, the system had trained me to understand exactly what that meant. It would not stop. It would not pause. It would simply choose differently, and the difference would not be random. For the first time, the thought of going to the police crossed my mind in a serious, actionable way. I even stood up, reached for my jacket, and paused with my hand on the door. The problem wasn't just fear of not being believed. It was the certainty that I had already crossed too many lines to present myself as anything other than complicit. I had participated, made decisions, influenced outcomes. Even if I tried to explain, there would be no way to separate myself from what had happened. And deeper than that was something worse. The system had already demonstrated reach. If it could access my device, track my behavior, and deliver messages outside of its own platform, then whatever controlled it was not limited to a hidden corner of the internet. It was embedded, connected, and far more aware than I wanted to accept. I sat back down. At the scheduled time, I opened the laptop. The interface loaded instantly. No transitions, no welcome messages, just a single feed and a name, not a code, not a number, a real name, my sister's. For a moment, my mind refused to process it. The letters felt familiar but disconnected, like reading something in a dream that only made sense after waking. Then the feed sharpened, and the denial collapsed completely. She was there, not restrained in the same way as the others had been, at least not at first glance, but contained, disoriented, trying to understand where she was and why. The room was identical to the others I had seen, which made it worse. It confirmed that there was no separation between what I had watched before and what was happening now. The chat was silent. No suggestions, no discussion. Just a message at the top of the screen. Primary observer required. My username appeared beneath it. I felt something inside me shift. Not panic, not shock, but a kind of hollow clarity. The system had escalated to its final stage. This was not about testing anymore. It was about control. A panel appeared. The options were different this time. They were not framed as procedural choices or behavioral adjustments. They were direct, explicit in their implications, even without graphic detail. Each one represented a path that would determine how the session progressed, how long it would last, and what the outcome would be. My hands didn't move. The timer appeared, shorter than any before. Observer delay will initiate default sequence. I watched her on the screen. She called out, confused, then louder, fear beginning to replace uncertainty. She moved around the limited space, testing boundaries, trying to find something that made sense. There was none. I thought about every moment that had led to this, every hesitation, every rationalization, every time I had convinced myself that I was not directly responsible. The system had been building toward this from the beginning, narrowing my options, removing distance, forcing me into a position where there was no way to disengage without consequence. The timer dropped to its final seconds. My cursor hovered over the panel. The realization came then, not as a sudden revelation, but as a slow, undeniable conclusion. This was never about the victims. It was about the observers. The system did not need to force participation. It cultivated it, measured it, refined it, until the observer became the mechanism. The timer reached 0. The system did not select for me. It waited. For the first time since this began, it gave me full control. No defaults, no forced outcome, just a decision. I moved the cursor, not toward the options, toward the edge of the screen. For a brief moment, I considered closing the laptop, shutting everything down, pretending that would end it. But I already knew that wasn't true. The system had extended beyond the screen long ago. Instead, I did something else. I disconnected the internet. The feed froze instantly. The chat disappeared. The interface collapsed into a blank screen. For a second, there was silence. Then the laptop screen flickered, and the feed returned. No connection, no loading, just the image. Clearer than before, closer. My sister looked directly at the camera, at me. A new message appeared, not on the interface, but over the video itself. Observer cannot disengage. The panel returned, but this time there was only one option, no alternatives, no variations, just a single, unavoidable choice. My hands trembled, but there was no hesitation left. The system had stripped that away, layer by layer, until all that remained was action. I made the decision. The response was immediate. Her reaction came a fraction of a second later, real, unfiltered, and irreversible. The details were not dramatic in the way movies portray them, but they were enough, precise enough, to confirm the finality of what I had done. There was a moment where she tried to speak, where recognition crossed her face, and then everything collapsed into stillness. The feed did not cut away. It lingered, not to show more, but to force me to remain. A final message appeared. Observer integration complete. The screen went black. I don't remember how long I sat there after that. Time didn't move the way it normally does. Eventually, the laptop restarted on its own. A new interface loaded. Cleaner, simpler, familiar. A forum. At the top of the page, a message scrolled. New observers welcome. Below it, a list of usernames. At the top of the list, mine. Highlighted. A number next to it. Higher than all the others. A notification appeared in the corner. Session begins soon. And beneath it, a smaller line. You will guide them. I understood then what the final stage had been. Not survival, not escape, promotion. I closed the laptop again, but it no longer mattered. The system was no longer something I accessed. It was something I had become part of. Somewhere, another person would click a link out of curiosity, just like I had. They would tell themselves it wasn't real, that they were only watching, that they could leave at any time. And eventually they would see my name. They wouldn't recognize it, but they would follow my decisions, the way I once followed someone else's. And when their turn came, when the system narrowed its focus onto them, they would understand too late what I already knew. There are no observers, only participants. And once you are inside, the only way out is to become the one deciding who stays.